In tonight's news edition, in telephone calls with His Majesty the King, Israel's President and Prime Minister expressed their apology over the killing of Jordanian judge Ra'ed Zaither. The US President urges the Palestinian President to make tough decisions and take risks for peace with Israel. And the West imposes sanctions, including acid freezes and travel bans, on officials from Russia and Ukraine after Crimea applies to join Russia. Good evening and very warm welcome to the news. His Majesty the King received a telephone call from Israeli President Shimon Peres, who offered his apology as President of Israel for the killing of Jordanian judge Ra'ed Zaither by Israeli soldiers last week. Peres voiced his deep sorrow and regret over the incident and said Israel is committed to moving forward with a joint investigation into the incident in cooperation with the Jordanian side. During the telephone conversation, the Israeli president pledged to continue to work with His Majesty and Jordan to serve the quest for peace in the region. His Majesty has also received a similar phone call from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The cabinet has named the Jordanian committee that will join the investigation into Zaither's killing, which will be headed by a member of the public prosecution and comprises representatives from the Foreign Ministry, the Interior Ministry and the Jordan Armed Forces. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour has asked the panel to start work and draw up a report as soon as possible and to bring him up to date on the findings. Meanwhile, Jordan strongly condemned escalating Israeli assaults on Al-Aqsa Mosque compound in occupied Jerusalem. State Minister for Media Affairs and Government spokesperson Mohammed Al-Momani said Jordan rejects Israel's closure of the mosque's gates, preventing worshippers and students from entering the holy compound and harassing the Islamic religious employees there. The minister warned Israel against imposing a new reality on the grounds of Al-Aqsa and allowing settlers and extremists to continue their violations of the sanctity of the holy site. He also urged the international community and organizations to pressure the occupation authorities to end their violations. Minister of State for Media Affairs Mohammed Al-Momani met a delegation from the Communications and Media Commission of Iraq to discuss ways of enhancing media coordination and coordination. Momani said Jordan is willing to cooperate with the Iraqi government and reminded the delegation of all the potential opportunities available for this purpose. Head of the Iraqi team and chairman of the Board of Trustees of the Media Commission hailed the level of cooperation between the two countries and highlighted its most prominent features. Jordanian border guards arrested 3 Syrians trying to infiltrate the kingdom's northern border. The military personnel on the border area also stopped 2 cars as they attempted to cross the frontier into Syria. A source at the Armed Forces General Command said the military guards opened fire at the 3 infiltrators who ignored orders to stop after crossing the northwestern area of the frontier at dawn. It said one of them was wounded and transferred to a nearby clinic, and the 2 others were also captured and handed over to authorities. Yesterday, 4 people were arrested in a similar infiltration attempt. US President Barack Obama urged Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas to make tough decisions and take risks for peace with Israel. In White House talks, Abbas pressed for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to go ahead with the scheduled release of a final group of Palestinian prisoners by the end of this month. This report has more.
In White House talks, US President Barack Obama told Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas he hoped to see progress in US brokered peace negotiations in coming weeks. Today's meeting came 2 weeks after Obama met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in his attempt to narrow gaps between the Palestinians and Israelis on a framework for a peace deal that would extend negotiations beyond an April deadline.
As I said to Prime Minister Netanyahu when he was here just a couple of weeks ago, I believe that now is the time for not just the leaders of both sides, but also the peoples of both sides to embrace this opportunity for peace. But we're going to have a lot of details that we're going to have to discuss. It's very hard. It's very challenging. We're going to have to take some tough political decisions and risks if we're able to move it forward. My hope is that we can continue to see progress in the coming days and weeks.
Abbas pressed for Netanyahu to go ahead with the scheduled release of a final group of Palestinian prisoners by the end of March, which was agreed by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry.
Mr. President, we have an agreement with Israel that was brokered by Mr. Kerry concerning the release of the fourth batch of prisoners, and we are hopeful that the fourth batch will be released by the 29th of March, because this will give a very solid impression about these efforts to achieve peace.
Outlining the Palestinian position, Abbas said he's working for a solution that includes a Palestinian state on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. He also said he's working for a solution to the problem of Palestinian refugees who fled or were driven away in 1948 when Israel was created. In the Israeli-occupied West Bank, thousands of Palestinians took to the streets to show their support for their leader. Palestinians rallied in the city of Ramallah, Hebron, and Bethlehem, backing Abbas's stance. They urged Abbas not to agree to the extension of the talks beyond the April 29th deadline.
The Palestinian president left Palestine saying that he is going and will not give in, will not give up on Jerusalem. And we came here today to say that we will not surrender or concede, and we will not accept extending the negotiations.
The talks aimed at creating an independent Palestinian state and end decades of conflict. Abbas said he will not agree to demands being made by the Israelis, including that he should recognize Israel as a Jewish state. Hala Dababne for the news at 10.
Russian President Vladimir Putin signed a decree recognizing Crimea as a sovereign state. The announcement came after the Ukrainian region declared itself independent and applied to join Russia following a weekend referendum. The referendum was condemned as illegal by Kiev and the West. The United States and the European Union imposed sanctions, including asset freezes and travel bans, on a group of officials from Russia and Ukraine. Here's more.
The result of the Crimea referendum is out, an overwhelming yes to join Russia. Crimeans are celebrating the initial vote counts, massively favoring the Black Sea Peninsula to break away from Ukraine and unite with Russia. The head of the Crimean Referendum Commission announced that almost 97% of voters supported Crimea joining Russia.
Fantastic. Of course I support it. It's the correct decision. And here we also want to hold a referendum and become a part of Russia, because people already are fed up with all these oligarch movements.
Sunday's vote was denounced as a sham by Western powers and leaders in Kyiv. But Russian President Vladimir Putin said the referendum on Crimea joining Russia is legitimate. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry told Moscow Washington would not accept the outcome of the vote in Crimea, which has an ethnic Russian majority and was transferred to Ukraine by Soviet rulers only 60 years ago.
This Crimean referendum cannot be true. It should be a referendum for all Ukrainians. It's not a referendum, it's a theatrical performance for Russian people where Russia is legalizing the takeover of these territories.
The EU and US have announced travel bans and asset freezes against a number of officials from Russia and Ukraine. US President Barack Obama imposed sanctions on 11 individuals.
Today I'm announcing a series of measures that will continue to increase the costs on Russia and on those responsible for what is happening in Ukraine. First, as authorized by the executive order I signed 2 weeks ago, we are imposing sanctions on specific individuals responsible for undermining the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and government of Ukraine.
The White House published a list of officials targeted, but Russian President Vladimir Putin himself was not sanctioned. The list of officials subject to EU sanctions includes 3 senior Russian commanders, the Prime Minister of Crimea, the Chairman of the Commonwealth of Independent States, and senior Duma and Federation Council officials. However, the bloc urged Moscow to take steps to defuse the crisis.
We want to underline very clearly that there is still time to avoid a negative spiral and to reverse current developments, and we call on the Russian leadership not to take steps to annex Crimea and instead to take steps to de-escalate this crisis.
Ukrainian political party leader and presidential hopeful Vitaly Klitschko dismissed Crimea's referendum and its effort to join Russia, saying the peninsula will remain a Ukrainian territory. Klitschko urged Western countries to uphold their responsibilities in ensuring Russia acted in accordance with the 1994 Budapest Memorandum that provided guarantees of Ukraine's sovereignty and integrity in exchange for a Ukrainian commitment to give up its Soviet-era nuclear weapons. Farah Ajlouni for the news at 10.
Lebanon's army blew up a car in the border region with Syria, which they suspected contained explosives and was being prepared for use in a bomb attack. Security sources said the car was found between the Beqa' Valley villages of Ras Baalbek and Fakiha. The area is about 5 kilometers north of a village where a suicide car bombing killed 3 people last night. 2 members of the Lebanese Hezbollah group were among the dead. The bombing appeared to be retaliation for Hezbollah's support for Syrian troops who had recaptured the border town of Yabrud from rebel fighters. Hezbollah has been the target of repeated car bombings and rocket fire inside Lebanon during the past year over its involvement in Syria's civil war. International mediator Lakhdar Brahimi was in Tehran for talks on the latest developments in Syria. He held talks with Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif and was due to meet with other Iranian officials. 2 rounds of peace talks mediated by Ibrahimi in Geneva failed to bring the Syrian government and opposition any closer to agreement on a transitional government. Iran is a long-time ally of President Bashar al-Assad, providing him with financial, military and moral support as he battles rebels trying to overthrow him. Several car bombs exploded at a Libyan army academy in the eastern city of Benghazi, killing at least 8 people and wounding more than a dozen. Instability in the eastern city is just part of the struggle a weak central government faces in controlling armed groups, militias and brigades of former rebels. A first bomb exploded at the academy's front gate as people were leaving a graduation ceremony. 1 or 2 other bombs exploded almost at the same time, wounding at least 13 people. The explosions came hours after U.S. Special Forces seized a commercial tanker that fled with a cargo of oil from a Libyan port controlled by anti-government rebels. The U.S. Navy commandos halted the rebels' attempt to sell petroleum on the global market. Libyan gunmen demanding regional autonomy and a share of oil wealth managed to load crude onto the ship which escaped Libya's Navy. U.S. Navy commandos stormed the tanker as it sat in international waters off Cyprus last night and took control of the vessel, which the Pentagon said was held by 3 armed Libyans. Tunisian police shot and killed 3 suspected militants and arrested 6 others in a raid near the Algerian border. Tunisia's Interior Ministry said security forces found weapons and an explosive belt in a house after the raid. Clashes broke out this morning when security forces raided a house in northwest Jendouba, where last month gunmen disguised as police killed 3 officers and a civilian in an attack. Algerian troops over the weekend killed 7 militants who had crossed over from the Tunisian side of the border. A small group of militants linked to Al-Qaeda has been using Tunisia's Chambi Mountains as a refuge. No trace of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 has been found since it vanished 9 days ago with 239 people aboard. The airline's chief executive said the co-pilot of the missing plane spoke the last words heard from the cockpit. Investigators consider suicide by the captain or first officer as one possible explanation for the disappearance. Investigators are increasingly convinced it was diverted perhaps thousands of miles off course by someone with deep knowledge of the Boeing 777-200ER and commercial navigation. A search unprecedented in its scale is now underway for the plane, covering an area stretching from the shores of the Caspian Sea in the north to deep in the southern Indian Ocean. The The airline chief executive also said it was unclear exactly when one of the plane's automatic tracking systems had been disabled. Suspicions of hijacking or sabotage had hardened further when officials said earlier that the last radio message from the plane was spoken after the system was shut down. France deployed hundreds of police in Paris to enforce the most drastic curbs on car use in 20 years. The authorities are seeking to reduce health-endangering pollution days before town hall elections. Almost 4,000 drivers who tried to dodge the restrictions were fined. More in this report.
It's a good time to have a hybrid in Paris. Otherwise, hundreds of police are pulling cars over trying to battle a smoggy situation. It's the most dramatic intervention since 1997, when authorities tried to reduce health-threatening pollution. Cars with even-numbered plates were told to stay home. Those who caught a ride with at least 3 people in the car, or so-called clean hybrid vehicles, were exempt.
Alors, bien évidemment, nous contrôlons tous les véhicules, enfin, tous ceux que nous pouvons contrôler.
Of course, we check all the vehicles we can. We ask the drivers to safely pull up on the side of the street, and we look at their situation. Some of them are part of the exception, such as cars with even numbers which have more than 3 people on board. There are also hybrid vehicles, low-emission vehicles, electric vehicles, etc. In those cases, we don't fine them and leave them to drive on.
Véhicules électriques, etc. Donc là, nous ne verbalisons pas, nous remettons en circulation ces usagers.
Recent balmy weather has contributed to pollution. And while police efforts are helping clear the skies, some drivers had to pull over nonetheless.
It's a first step to curb the pollution we face on a daily basis.
Those who used public transport were in luck with a free ride today. Around 120 vehicles were stopped by authorities early in the day. Drivers who broke the rules faced fines of 22 euros or $31 US.
In the United States, a late winter storm landed a final punch on the U.S. mid-Atlantic states, dumping more than 30 centimeters of snow in some places. The snowstorm shut schools and federal offices as flights were cancelled. Meteorologists say no change in the cold weather in the eastern United States is likely for next week. The storm that hit Virginia, West Virginia, Maryland, Delaware and southern New Jersey had largely moved out to sea. It was the second heaviest snowfall the capital has recorded this late in the season. 4 passengers on an intercity commercial bus were seriously injured when it veered off a snowy interstate highway south of Washington and flipped onto its side. Novak Djokovic beat his old rival Roger Federer 3-6, 6-3, 7-6 to win a nail-biting BNP Paribas Open final at Indian Wells and capture his first title of 2014. The thrilling victory gave Djokovic his 3rd championship in the Californian Desert Tournament and lifted his career tally to 42 titles. It was Federer's first loss in a final at Indian Wells after he had previously won a record 4 times.
2 sets to 1, 3-6, 6-3, 7-6.
And in the women's division, Italy's Flavia Pennetta captured the biggest title of her career when she beat Poland's Agnieszka Radwanska. As Radwanska struggled with a knee injury, Pennetta cruised to a 6-2, 6-1 victory in less than an hour and a quarter. Radwanska went into the match as a slight favorite, but was unable to play near her best because of a knee injury that severely restricted her movement. Pennetta beat rising American Sloane Stephens in the quarterfinals and Australian Open champion Lena in the semis. And finally, cool and partly cloudy weather will continue tonight with southwesterly moderate winds and a chance for rain. A drop in temperatures is expected tomorrow, creating relatively cold weather in most regions. There is a chance for light showers in the northern and central regions tomorrow, while winds will be southwesterly moderate to brisk. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect fair conditions tomorrow with southerly brisk winds and slightly choppy seas. Next are the lows and highs for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here is a reminder of the day's top stories. In telephone calls with His Majesty the King, Israel's President and Prime Minister expressed their apology over the killing of Jordanian judge Ra'ed Zaitar. The US President urges the Palestinian President to make tough decisions and take risks for peace with Israel. And the West imposes sanctions, including acid freezes and travel bans on officials from Russia and Ukraine after Crimea applies to join Russia. And that's the end of tonight's news. My name is Ra'ed Liptosh. Thanks for watching and have a good night.